Okay, it is Wednesday, May 29th, and we're talking about best ball once again, specifically as it relates to this Green Bay Packers group, because this is an interesting group. We've got 4 wide receivers all going within a 30-point differential for their rankings. We've got Jayden Reed at wide receiver 34, Christian Watson at wide receiver 46, Romeo Doubs at wide receiver 50, and Dontayvion Wicks at wide receiver 61. So that is a very tight grouping, and obviously they can't all outperform their ADP. But we're going to go ahead and look and see which ones we should target and which ones we should fade. Now, before we get into it, do me a solid, hit that like and subscribe, help this channel grow, and I would definitely appreciate it. So there is a huge caveat here, and that is the health of Christian Watson. Because when you look at the numbers for how these wide receivers performed when Watson was on the field versus when Watson was off the field, they are definitely different, okay? For those who don't know, Watson missed 8 games last year due to hamstring issues. And he's been working this offseason along with the Packers to find out what's causing these habitual hamstring issues. And they found out that one of his legs is 20% weaker than the other. Now, despite the memes, this does not mean that he has one teeny tiny leg and one really big leg. It just means that the way that he's shifting his body weight, he tends to favor one side over the other. Now, Watson has come out and said that on the offseason, he has been working to get that number lower, down to 18%, down to 16%, and presumably as that number decreases, the chance of him re-aggravating it also diminishes. Also worth noting, the Packers do have a new strength and conditioning coach who preaches stretching. The players have doubled their stretching times prior to practice and will do so prior to games. So let's go ahead and look at how Watson's presence and absence affected the other receivers. So the first of the 4 wide receivers is Jayden Reed, currently going 62nd overall and is ranked as the wide receiver 34. Now, Jayden Reed had a great rookie year by all accounts, and there is the added benefit that LaFleur loves using him in sweep packages, so he'll sneak out a couple rushing touchdowns as well. My only problem with Reed is the fact that his numbers took quite a dip when Watson returned to the field. Jayden Reed had 2 games over 20 points, one of them was 26.9, but both of those over 20-point games were when Watson was off the field. Jayden Reed also had 3 19-point games that were all around 19.2, 19.4, I think 19.6. They were all very, very close to one another. But one of those was when Watson was off the field as well. So his average points per game when Watson is on the field is only 11.3. And I'm not sure that 11.3 points per game is cutting it when we're drafting someone 62nd overall. That's still pretty high. So for that reason, I'm going to fade Jayden Reed. Now, if you think that Christian Watson's injuries are going to be an issue, maybe you will want to draft him. And if that is the case, then Jayden Reed definitely has the upside to have a huge breakout year. But I'm going to have faith that these coaches and these doctors have identified the root of Watson's problem and that he will play significantly more games this year than last year. All right. The next wide receiver is Christian Watson himself, going 88th overall, projected as the wide receiver 46, and I think he has the potential to absolutely smash that ranking. For those who don't know, Christian Watson is 6'4", 208 pounds. He runs a 10-yard split in 1.45, a 20-yard split in 2.45, and the 40 in 4.35. That is insane for someone that size. He's proven himself as a deep field target and had some great games last year when he was healthy on the field. He had a 27.6 point game. He had another game that was over 20 points as well. And worth noting that a lot of the time he was playing, he was definitely not 100%. And that's so important for a receiver like himself who relies on his speed. Now, I know the injury factor does give a lot of people pause, and there are players who never get over their injuries and just keep re-aggravating them. But it is worth noting that Watson's pretty young and he's taking proactive steps to fix this. And let's not forget one Christian McCaffrey who was injury prone, right? He missed 4 games in 2020 with a very similar upper leg issue, a thigh strain. He missed 5 games in 2021 with a hamstring issue as well. And he is currently, in 2024, going as the undisputed round 1, pick 1 player in the draft. So there are times when it's definitely good to be cautious about injuries, but there's also times when you have to let go of that grudge, okay? Especially when there's such a potential for upside and a player is going at a nice ADP range where it's more of a low risk, high reward as it relates to Watson going 88th overall. Now, the next receiver is Romeo Doubs, currently going 108th overall. For best ball purposes, I'm going to fade Romeo Doubs. All right, he is definitely a talented receiver, but he does not produce these huge point games. I think he's got a pretty good floor and might be valuable in redraft if you need someone who's going to somewhat consistently get around the 12 to 14 point range. But for best ball, where we're looking for large points in certain games, he might not be the best target for your draft, okay? His highest point game during the regular season was 18.5. He did have a 30-point game in the postseason, but for those regular season games, and he was available for just about all of them. I believe he missed 1 game. His highest fantasy points were 18.5. So for that reason, and also considering some of the people who were being drafted around him, I would avoid him for best ball, okay? I also always remember when Davante Adams left, everyone was looking for who's going to be the heir apparent to Davante Adams, right? Some people thought Allen Lazard. News broke that Romeo Doubs was excelling in training camp and his ADP skyrocketed. And Christian Watson stayed around 170, stayed pretty low. But then it ended up that Romeo Doubs, who was all the way in the 120s for ADP, only put up a little over 100 fantasy football points. And then Watson, who was back there in the 170s, ended up putting up about 162. So in LaFleur's offense, it's clear that the Packers do want to get Christian Watson involved. All right. The last wide receiver is Dontayvion Wicks, and a lot of people are excited about him, and rightfully so. He's going 137th overall, which is when you start taking some risks that could pay off in spades, right? And towards the end of the season, although Watson was out, we saw Wicks's target share go up considerably. He had a 24.1 game and a 50.7 game. Sorry, 15, not 50. 15.7 game within the span of 3 weeks. And he's proven that he can be a trusted target for Love. He's got great hands, and he's definitely a competitive player when it comes to receiving. So while I think he's going to have a very low floor, there's going to be some games where they flat out just don't get him involved. He's going to definitely show up in a few games and probably produce some of those big 20, 25 point games here and there. And that's exactly what we're looking for in best ball when we're getting into the 137th overall. So I would definitely consider drafting him. Again, this is such an interesting group because so much is dependent on the injury of Watson and the availability of these wide receivers, how they relate in this scheme. So it is a little bit of a guessing game. But again, my plan is I'm going to fade Reed and I'm going to fade Doubs. I'm going to target Christian Watson like crazy. I'm going to definitely target Dontayvion Wicks as well. So thank you for watching. We'll definitely be back with some more content, and happy drafting.